Today we're looking at some very budget GPUs in the $50, $125, and $150 price range, and honestly, all three of these are potentially really good for both personal builds and even budget flips. All three of these cards were purchased at some incredible prices on AliExpress, but even if you don't see the exact pricing or models that I paid for, almost all of the information in this video is relevant if you're considering buying a GPU from AliExpress. Whether you're outside of the United States where AliExpress is your only option, or if you're just looking to build the ultimate price to performance all-white budget gaming PC, there's a ton of value for you in this video, and it all comes after a quick word from today's sponsor, Corsair, and their brand new HS80 Max wireless gaming headset. These new Max versions take an already popular headset and give them a boost with an updated 65-hour battery life, huge 50mm drivers with Dolby Atmos surround sound, and just like normal, they're as clean as ever. Corsair kindly sent out both the black and white versions, which look amazing, and they're also super comfortable to wear as well. I love the adjustable fabric strap so you can get the exact amount of resistance on top of your head. And the HS80 has been my go-to choice for my own 3 to 4 hour PC building live streams where comfort is super important. You can check these out for yourself by clicking that first link down in the description. All right, so for our testing today, I specifically purchased 3 different manufacturers of these cards just so we can test as many of them as possible. If you look on AliExpress, there's a ton of GPU brands that you most likely have never heard of before, but don't worry because we also bought more name brand cards of the same GPU model so we can test to see if there's any difference in performance. Now, the pricing of these cards has changed since I purchased them, but like I said, you're gonna get a ton of value in this video because everything that I'm about to say pretty much applies to just the overall GPU landscape on AliExpress. And speaking of which, we absolutely always need to talk about the main disclaimer of AliExpress GPUs because this will impact some of you more than others. As some other YouTubers uncovered earlier this year, apparently some of these brands are using old GPU dies from cards that were previously mined on, and they're using brand new parts for everything else. Basically, they're building a new PCB, shroud, and fan assembly, and there's obvious benefits and negatives to this. It's not quite clear which specific manufacturers are doing this though, and if they're doing it for every GPU or just a specific model, it's just something that you have to keep in mind if you're considering these cards. On the surface, these look and feel like brand new GPUs. They're perfectly white, shiny, and there's zero dust on them whatsoever, but underneath the hood might be a different story. The other disclaimer about using AliExpress is that you are protected with normal buyer protections like almost every marketplace has, but on AliExpress, it might be a little bit extra difficult to actually utilize it. You have the ability to contact customer support, file a return, and do all that.
Look, why do you need your money so fast? Come on.
But with AliExpress, you're dealing with a Chinese website selling products from Chinese companies and sellers. I've personally never had to do that before, but that's a good thing because I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on AliExpress parts over the past few years, but again, I just can't imagine it's gonna be an easy process. But remember that you are dealing with similar risks with US-based marketplaces like eBay and Mercari as well, because you can get scammed absolutely anywhere on the internet. Dealing with customer support on eBay or even Amazon is a multi-hour painful process most of the time, but again, it's probably easier than AliExpress. And one more thing, just as a control point for our testing, I did purchase name brand cards of the models we're about to talk about. One of them is from PowerColor and the other 2 are from Zotac. I did purchase all of these used, of course, at some good deals, so you'll most likely be seeing all 6 of these GPUs in ZTT YouTube videos at some point in the next couple of months. Make sure you hit the subscribe button for that and comment a basketball emoji down in the comment section if you're actually subscribing to ZTT for the very first time right now. With that being said, let's start taking a look at the pros and cons of each of these cards, and then we'll get to benchmarking them right afterwards. And we have a ton of benchmarking data and just information about these GPUs for you, so I would recommend just pausing this video, maybe grabbing a drink. Let's get into it. Starting with our cheapest model, this is the Elsa RX 588GB, and I picked this up for $57 a couple of weeks ago. The pricing on this one is way higher now, but again, that could drop down at some point again, and there are a ton of other RX 580 models available on AliExpress. This Elsa model came in a very standard cardboard box that just says Elsa graphics card, and there's no specific model in here, and they're probably using this box for all of their GPUs that they sell. This is a pretty clean looking card though, as it's all white, other than those silver heat pipes that you can see from the side, but honestly, this card looks and feels a bit amateur. I'm not expecting any high quality craftsmanship from these AliExpress sellers, but honestly, this card borderline feels like it was 3D printed. There's no design on the backplate, and it just feels like super cheap material. I actually built my own DIY acrylic back panel a long time ago, and it kind of feels just like that one. Regardless of the physical quality though, the aesthetics of this card are pretty dialed in, and you could definitely use this in a flip build or a budget all white personal build. It fully achieves its mission that it's trying to accomplish, which is just being an all-white graphics card that's very affordable. The video port selection on the card is very standard as well. It has just one HDMI and 3 display ports. This is what you'd see on most GPUs right now. And one other thing that's also kind of shady is that I don't see any sort of mention on the AliExpress page about this being a 2048 stream processor version of the RX 580. Almost every quote new RX 580 you'll find these days, even on places like Amazon, will be the 2048 SP model, and this is essentially just a slightly cut down version of the original 580. I have a gut feeling right off the bat that that's what's going on with this card, but we'll confirm that in the benchmarking section. The other thing to note about RX 580s is that the driver support is done for this card as of just a little while ago, so future games coming out in 2024 and beyond won't get optimized drivers for it. This means that you're not going to get the absolute best performance on a per game level with this GPU anymore, and because of that alone is why I've honestly stopped recommending the RX 580. Nope. This was such a legendary budget graphics card for so many years, and even with the nice sized 8GB of VRAM, I still don't recommend it because of the lack of driver support. You may feel differently though, because this still is a super clean all-white GPU for around $50, but that choice is yours. Moving on, next up we have this SJS GTX 1660 Super, and I picked this one up for $126. The box for it seems a little bit more legit than our RX 580 box, as you can see the typical NVIDIA shapes and colors on here. Fear not though, because it's definitely still shady. Not only does it say GeForce RTX, but there's also a little green sticker where the model name goes, and that says it's a 1660 Super, which is a GTX card, not RTX.
The lies! There you go, this bitch.
Again, they are probably using this box and just swapping out the sticker for every GPU that they sell. Now, compared to the RX 580, this card definitely feels more legit as it's heavier and the materials feel like they're a bit higher quality, but from an aesthetics perspective, it's actually a bit worse. There's no backplate, so you can see the full black PCB, and on black GPUs, this isn't a huge deal, but for white GPUs, it's a huge eyesore. Most people that are interested in buying white graphics cards want to pair these GPUs with all white components, so this is definitely not a good look. That's what it looks like. I also absolutely hate the look of these SJS stickers on the fans, but in most horizontal configurations, you won't see these and you can always remove them if you want to. I also noticed that the connector selection on this GPU is very weak, as it's just one HDMI, one DisplayPort, and then a useless DVI-D. This would be very important to realize if you were thinking about buying this card for a multi-monitor setup. Now, in terms of future-proofing, the GTX 1660 Super should continue to be supported by NVIDIA for several more years, and the 6GB of VRAM isn't ideal, but it shouldn't play that much of a factor. VRAM is becoming more and more required, and most people want at least an 8GB card these days, but for ultra budget GPUs like this, I think it'll be perfectly fine. And finally, the third card that we have here is an RTX 2060 Super, and this time from a company called Milsea, and I grabbed this one for $163. Unlike the other cards, the price of this one has actually come down since I bought it, and it's closer to $150. For the box, we have another shady design, but this time they're not completely trying to rip off NVIDIA, which is nice, and you can see the RTX 2060S sticker here on the side. For the aesthetics and feel, this reminds me a lot of the RX 580 that we just looked at. It's using what I think is the exact same super lightweight acrylic material for the shroud and backplate, and this backplate somehow has even less of a design than the 580 does. And when I run my fingers through these fins on the rear side of the GPU, it feels like I could easily break these. It's clearly just all cheap material. But again, for a white personal build, or especially a flip, this budget GPU still allows you to keep all of the components inside your build all white on a budget. And for performance, the RTX 2060 Super is still a very relevant card right now, and it can play any game pretty easily in 1080p, as we'll see soon. The port selection is also in tip-top shape with the one HDMI and 3 display ports. Because of everything I just said, including the price, this one is probably my favorite card of this lineup. And before we start testing them, I think it's pretty clear what's actually going on here. I quickly explained this in the intro, but basically there's a bunch of these Chinese companies taking the chip, whether it's new or used, and then they're building everything else around it with brand new budget materials. This allows them to sell their GPUs at a great price, usually less than what you'll find on US-based used marketplaces, and for us budget ballers, this is sometimes what's the most important. The GPUs on AliExpress for the most part are pretty stable in price and way more readily available compared to those random one-off deals on marketplaces such as eBay and Mercari. And again, a lot of the ZTT audience doesn't live in the United States where we have access to places like Java and Mercari, so for those type of people, AliExpress is their #1 place to buy a used graphics card, which is why I keep making making these videos. Moving on to testing for our control units, which again are just more recognizable name brands of the same GPU models. Today we have a PowerColor RX 580 8GB, a Zotac GTX 1660 Super, and another Zotac RTX 2060 Super. If all goes well, the 1660 Super and 2060 Super should benchmark with the exact same results, and we'll probably see just a bit more FPS with the PowerColor 580 over the AliExpress model. The 204080 SP model usually gets a little bit lower FPS. And here's the testing rig that we'll be using today. This is the same PC that we used to benchmark for our last GPU video, which was determining if the RTX 2080 Super is still a good card worth checking out in 2023. As a quick spoiler alert, it definitely is, at least for the right price, so check out that video after this one if you're interested. For the testing components, we have a Ryzen 5 5600 paired with just a cheap B450 motherboard, and there's 16GB of DDR4 RAM clocked at 3600 MHz. Everything is inside the Deepcool CH560, which again has this super sick CPU and GPU temperature gauge, which makes testing a whole lot easier. And yeah, we'll be testing the temperature speeds of all of these graphics cards, including the 3 other ones as well. And for another quick side note, we will be selling this testing rig as a normal gaming PC during our next January 1st restock. We'll be selling it with an Asus RX 6700 XT, which will complement the Ryzen 5 5600 perfectly, and we're gonna sell it for like $700, so definitely keep your eyes peeled and turn on the notifications because it'll sell out quickly. And with all of that aside, it's now time to get into the benchmarks. That was a ton of information, but we have a lot more information coming your way. We'll start with the RX 580 8GB card, and just as a reminder, this is about a $50 GPU. With 3D Mark Time Spy, we got a score of 3,946, and as we expected, it's a touch lower than what we got with the PowerColor card. This is a 10.6% increase. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 was up next, and when using 1080p in basic settings, which is pretty much medium, we got 66 FPS with the AliExpress card and a little 9% increase with the PowerColor. Cyberpunk 2077 followed up after that, and when using 1080p low, we couldn't quite get that target 60 FPS mark with either of the cards, but these numbers are definitely still playable in my opinion. And here's the results for Assassin's Creed Mirage. We used 1080p low settings again and got pretty similar results to Cyberpunk. Here's the rest of the games that we tested with the AliExpress RX 580, and as you can see, other than Starfield, which of course is to be expected, every game can hit the 60 FPS target mark, and it's still a playable card at the end of 2023. All of the games being released after this video will of course not be supported, like I said, because the driver support is done, but for some of you, if you just want a $50 graphics card right this very second, it still might be a good option for you. And just to recap, my suspicion was confirmed. This is indeed a 2048 SP model, and that's why it benchmarked about 10% slower than a quote normal RX 580. We shouldn't see a difference with the other cards though. Speaking of which, here's the GTX 1660 Super, and we got a much nicer 6,260 3D Mark Time Spy score, and it's actually a bit higher than what we got with the Zotac card. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 followed up after that, and in 1080p with balance settings, we got 75 FPS, but this time it was significantly slower than the Zotac card. This is a little flip-flop action here, which honestly I really can't explain. Cyberpunk 2077 was up next, and in 1080p medium, we got right on the money at 60 FPS, and that was about the same with the Zotac card. Here's Forza Ryzen 5, and when using 1080p in high settings, both the cards got exactly 101 FPS. Like I said, this is still a very powerful GPU right now. Here's all the other games we tested for the SJS GTX 1660 Super, and a lot of these games were in the 1080p medium and sometimes even high settings. For about a $125 graphics card, again being all white, this is some pretty decent price to performance. Per usual though, the RX 5700 XT is around this same pricing, and that would give you much better FPS per dollar, but I don't think they make budget all-white units of that card, but let me know that in the comment section if you've ever seen one. And yeah, other than those weird Modern Warfare 3 results, the Zotac card benchmarked pretty evenly with the SJS model, so I don't think we have an issue here. And finally, let's start benchmarking the RTX 2060 Super, and here's the Time Spy scores for that. Both the Mil-C and Zotac cards are right about the same here, between 86 and 8700. And next up, here's the results for Modern Warfare 3, and both cards are actually testing at 1080p Ultra, which is great to see, and there's a small margin of error difference here. Next, we tested Cyberpunk 2077, and here's the settings for 1080p high. This is a pretty demanding game, mind you, and we still got over 70 FPS. The 2060 Super is still a beast of a GPU right now. Here's the results that we got for Assassin's Creed Mirage, again using 1080p and high settings, and we're at about 83 FPS for both cards. And finally, here's the rest of the games being tested with the RTX 2060 Super, and now we're looking at mostly 1080p high settings, not too shabby for a $150 GPU. So for a very oversimplified recap, the $50 RX 580 can give you about 1080p low gaming, the $125 GTX 1660 Super can give you about 1080p medium, and then the $150 RTX 2060 Super can get you up to 1080p high. And for all 6 cards that we tested today, we also did a Cinebench 2024 GPU stress test to see where the temperatures were reading at, and these results are actually pretty interesting. As you can see, the AliExpress off-brand cards are all testing lower than their name brand counterparts, and there's a significant difference with the RX 580 and the GTX 1660 Super. Now, if you think about it, this really shouldn't be a surprise surprised because we're talking about a somewhat new or possibly new graphics card versus a definitely used graphics card. These Power Color and Zotac GPUs have definitely been put through their paces with gaming, GPU mining, or honestly probably both, and they aren't going to be running as cool as they should. We didn't swap thermal paste or reapply any of the thermal pads or even dust out these GPUs. We tested these exactly how they arrived to the HQ. On the other hand, the AliExpress GPUs are rocking brand new fans, brand new thermal paste and thermal pads, and there isn't a speck of dust on them at all. It makes sense that they would be running cooler, but it's honestly nice to see that these off-brand companies at least didn't jack up the cooling of these cards. They at least made a competent fan assembly and shroud to properly keep the cards cool. Now, with all that benchmarking and reviewing out of the way, are these graphics cards worth it to a PC gamer? In my opinion, it's worth it for someone like me, but that decision does have some drawbacks to it. Yes, they are kind of shady. They come in a shady box, and I don't know how good of customer support I'm gonna get. But what's more important to someone like me is the FPS per dollar and the aesthetics per dollar, which these cards definitely deliver on. You aren't losing any performance compared to the more legit cards other than the RX 580 2048 SP issue. Now, the downsides of buying a card like this are pretty obvious, and if these downsides are too big for you to make one of these cards worth it to buy, then that's perfectly acceptable. You're definitely gonna have way longer shipping times with AliExpress, at least here to the United States. You're potentially buying a falsely advertised, quote, new GPU that's actually not new, and you'll probably have zero comfort buying from one of these brands. If you think that you'll get extra comfort buying a GPU from a brand like Asus, MSI, or any of the other ones, then that's a perfectly valid opinion. We all have different priorities and values when it comes to building our gaming PCs, and I'm not gonna judge someone for their GPU selection. If I saw somebody using an AliExpress GPU, I wouldn't negatively judge them. I would just gather that the benefits of buying one are more important for that specific person. Again, we all have different values and interests, and building a PC that can successfully play games is the ultimate goal here. And if you're looking for ideas of how to build a budget custom PC that would match perfectly with any of these GPUs, then feel free to click the video that's on the screen now.